Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Life on my Texas ranch was perfect, peaceful, quiet, and free from anyone telling me what to do until Karen showed up. As the head of the HOA, she thought she could control everything, including me. She shut off my water, but she underestimated two things: U.S. law and my goose, Henry. Living on a ranch in Texas was supposed to be my ticket to peace and quiet. My name is Bill Randall, and a few years ago, I bought this piece of land precisely because it was far away from nosy neighbors, restrictive HOA rules, and people telling me what to do with my own property. My ranch is my sanctuary. Open fields, a couple of horses, a well-tended vegetable garden, and my most loyal companion, Henry. Now, Henry is no ordinary pet. He's a goose. But not just any goose. He's the meanest, most territorial, no-nonsense security system you could ever ask for. The UPS guy learned that the hard way. For the first year or so, life was good. I spent my days fixing up the place, tending to my animals, and enjoying the simple pleasure of drinking coffee on my porch while watching the sunrise. But all of that changed when Karen Wilson moved into the fancy HOA-controlled neighborhood next to my property. If peace had a natural predator, it would be a middle-aged woman with a superiority complex and a laminated rulebook. Karen wasn't just a resident of that HOA, she was its president, and from the moment she laid eyes on my land, she made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. At first, it was just petty complaints. One day, she marched up my driveway, clipboard in hand, and informed me that my barn didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I reminded her that my land wasn't part of her HOA, and therefore her opinion meant absolutely nothing. She left with a tight-lipped smile, but I could tell she wasn't done. Then came the letters. Oh, the letters. Official-looking envelopes with urgent community concern stamped on the front, all written in the same condescending tone. Your property's appearance is negatively impacting home values. We strongly encourage you to repaint your fence. Livestock should be kept in properly zoned areas. I ignored them all. When the letters didn't work, she tried recruiting the neighbors. Some of them actually came by, parroting her nonsense, telling me it would just be easier if I followed a few of their rules to keep the community nice. One guy had the nerve to suggest that I just join the HOA to avoid any tension. I told him I'd rather wrestle a rattlesnake naked. He left quickly after that. Then Karen started calling in complaints to the city, to the health department, to animal control. Suddenly, I had random inspectors showing up at my place, checking if my horses were a health hazard or if my well water was negatively affecting local resources. Every single complaint was dismissed because, legally, I was in the clear. But Karen didn't care about laws. She cared about control. She was biding her time, waiting for the perfect way to sink her claws into my life. And when she found it, she went all in. One morning, I turned on the tap to fill Henry's water bowl, and nothing came out. At first, I thought it was a busted pipe. Then, I noticed something strange. The main water valve, the one connecting my land to the public supply, had been shut off. I stormed outside, and there she was, Karen standing near the valve with a wrench in her hand, looking proud as hell of herself. "Good morning, Bill," she chirped, as if she hadn't just committed a crime on my property. "I had to take some necessary steps. Your property is consuming more than its fair share of water, and as the president of the HOA, I have a duty to ensure responsible usage for the entire community." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer insanity of what I was hearing. "Karen, you do realize that I am not part of your HOA, right? You have zero authority over my land." She gave me a smug little shrug. "Well, the pipes run through HOA-controlled areas. That means I get a say in how much water you're allowed to use." That was it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another stupid HOA dispute. This was war. I stood there staring at Karen, trying to process the sheer audacity of what she had just said. She wasn't just harassing me anymore. She had physically tampered with my property. This wasn't about HOA rules or aesthetic preferences. This was sabotage. I took a slow, deep breath, keeping my temper in check. Barely. "Karen, you have exactly 10 seconds to turn that valve back on before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing and vandalism." She smirked, crossing her arms. "Oh, Bill, don't be so dramatic. This isn't your water. It runs through our community, and as HOA president, I have a responsibility to ensure it's used appropriately. You are using an excessive amount." I cut her off. For what? Watering my horses, tending my garden, flushing my toilet. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You are fully aware that you have no legal right to touch my water supply. You overplayed your hand, Karen. She had the gall to laugh. Oh, come on. Do you really think the sheriff is going to care about a small adjustment to water usage? We're in a dry season, Bill, and your farm is consuming way more than the other residents. We can't have you draining our reserves. Now I was the one laughing. Draining your reserves. Karen, I have a separate contract with the water company. You literally have no authority over my supply. She gave an exaggerated sigh, as if I was being difficult. Well, that's not entirely true. The pipes run through HOA-controlled streets, which means they're technically part of our infrastructure. I narrowed my eyes. You're making that up. She shrugged. Sue me. That was her mistake. I pulled out my phone right in front of her and dialed the water company. The moment an agent picked up, I put them on speaker. Hey, this is Bill Randall. I live out on the ranch just past Willow Creek. Someone has illegally shut off my water supply, and I need an immediate service request to restore it. Karen's smirk faltered. The agent on the other end sounded confused. Sir, we don't have any active maintenance orders for your property. Are you sure there isn't a local issue with your valve? Oh, I'm sure, I said, locking eyes with Karen. Because my neighbor, who does not have legal authority over my property, just admitted to shutting it off herself. The agent's tone changed immediately. Sir, if someone has tampered with your supply without proper authorization, that is a serious legal violation. We can send a technician out today, but I recommend you report this to local law enforcement. Karen's face went pale. I grinned. Oh, don't worry. I'll be calling the sheriff right after this. She threw up her hands. Bill, let's be reasonable here. No, 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 I interrupted, finally letting my anger loose. You do not get to talk about reason after what you just did. You have been harassing me since the day you moved in. But this is straight up illegal. I don't give a damn about your HOA power trips. You just crossed a line. Karen, realizing she had miscalculated, shifted tactics. She straightened up, putting on her most condescending, fake calm voice. Bill, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement if you just agree to follow a few HOA guidelines. I laughed. Oh, now, you want to make a deal? Let me be very clear, Karen. You and your HOA have zero control over me or my land. And after I get my water turned back on, I'm going to make sure you regret ever thinking otherwise. Her smug demeanor cracked. Are you threatening me? I grinned. Oh, Karen, I don't make threats. I make calls to my lawyer. And just like that, she turned on her heel and stormed away, disappearing back into her HOA kingdom. But I wasn't done with her. If she thought this was over, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Karen may have retreated, but I knew better than to assume she'd learned her lesson. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If anything, I had just declared war. And Karen, she wasn't the type to back down without a fight. Less than 24 hours after I called the water company and had my supply restored, the retaliation began. First, I received a notice from the city inspector. Apparently, there had been a concerned citizen report about my barn being a potential structural hazard. A hazard. My barn had been standing strong for years, but of course, now that Karen was losing ground, she decided to play dirty. Then came the animal control officer. Someone, I wonder who, had filed a complaint about my horses being in inhumane conditions. The guy showed up at my gate looking almost embarrassed as he explained that he was required to investigate. I waved him in. Go ahead, take a look, I said. I guarantee you my animals are in better shape than half the dogs in this town. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, he left shaking his head. Everything checks out fine, he admitted. Sorry about this, Mr. Randall. Looks like you've got someone trying to cause trouble. Oh, I knew exactly who was trying to cause trouble. But the final straw. That came 2 days later when I found a bright red violation notice nailed to my fence. The HOA, yes, the HOA I wasn't even a member of, had fined me $500 for excessive noise disturbances. What was the noise disturbance? My rooster. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Earl, the aforementioned rooster, was a loud, obnoxious little bastard. But he wasn't any louder than the leaf blowers, barking dogs, and weekend pool parties coming from Karen's neighborhood. And more importantly, the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. This was Karen's last desperate attempt to flex her so-called power. and I was about to crush it. I didn't just ignore the fine. I called a property lawyer and had him draft a cease and desist letter stating that any further attempts by the HOA to enforce their rules on my land would result in a lawsuit for harassment and unlawful interference with private property. Then, just to twist the knife, I made copies of that letter and sent them to every single HOA board member. By the time Karen received hers, I imagined she was already turning red with rage, but I wasn't done yet. Oh no. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get a full-scale invasion. I knew Karen wasn't the type to let things go. Losing wasn't in her vocabulary, and after my cease and desist letter had made its way around the HOA board, I could only imagine the rage boiling inside her. The logical thing for her to do would have been to back off, cut her losses, and stop interfering with my property. But Karen wasn't logical, so when my security camera alert pinged me at 2:17 a.m., I wasn't surprised to see a figure creeping toward my water valve. I sat up in bed, grabbed my phone, and checked the live feed. And there she was, Karen, dressed in all black, holding a wrench, tiptoeing across my property like a cartoon villain. I couldn't believe it. She was actually trying to shut off my water again. This woman had no limits. But what she didn't realize, what she never could have anticipated, was that she had just walked into Henry's territory. Henry, my goose, my fearless feathered warrior, had been sleeping peacefully near the barn. But as soon as Karen made the mistake of stepping too close to his domain, his instincts kicked in. The moment she bent down to grab the valve, Henry struck. I watched, wide-eyed, as Henry launched himself toward her with the speed and fury of a winged demon. His beak snapped in the night air, his wings spread wide, and he let out a blood-curdling hiss that probably woke up half the damn county. Karen yelped in surprise, nearly dropping her wrench. She tried to shoo him away with one hand while desperately fumbling with the valve with the other. Big mistake. Henry wasn't just defending my property. He was making it personal. The second she turned her attention back to the valve, Henry lunged at her legs, pecking and biting with pinpoint accuracy. Karen screamed. She stumbled back, trying to shake him off, but Henry was relentless. He flapped his wings aggressively, chasing her around the yard like a heat-seeking missile of vengeance. "Get away, you stupid bird," she shrieked, kicking wildly. Henry dodged like a pro and went straight for his signature move, biting her right in the ass. I damn near fell out of my chair laughing. Karen let out a wail of pure humiliation, tripping over her own feet and landing face first in a puddle of mud. But Henry still wasn't done. As she tried to scramble to her feet, she grabbed onto the nearest thing for support, the electric fence I had set up to keep coyotes out. For a second, everything seemed to pause. Then, zap. A loud crack filled the air as Karen got a nice little jolt of reality. She yelped, stumbled back, and fell straight onto her ass again, this time looking completely defeated. Henry stood over her, triumphant, his beady little eyes filled with the satisfaction of a job well done. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, flipping on the porch light. "Well, well, well," I drawled, crossing my arms. "Fancy meeting you here, Karen." She looked up at me, covered in mud, her hair sticking out in every direction, still panting from the attack. "You," she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You trained that thing to attack me." I whistled, and Henry casually strutted back toward me, fluffing his wings proudly. "I didn't train him to do anything," I said with a grin. "But I did warn you about trespassing." Karen struggled to her feet, wiping her face with her sleeve. I was just checking the pipes. This is a public safety issue." "Uh-huh," I said, nodding toward the security camera mounted right above us, blinking with a red recording light. "Why don't we check the footage and see what the cops think?" Her face drained of color. You wouldn't," she stammered. "Oh, Karen," I said, enjoying this far too much. "You literally told me to sue you, so I think I will." And just like that, she turned and ran, limping, covered in mud, her ass still probably stinging from Henry's final parting gift. I looked down at my fearless guardian. "Henry, my friend," I said, giving him an approving nod. "Tonight, you have done the Lord's work." And as Henry fluffed his feathers and strutted back toward the barn, I made one final decision. Tomorrow morning, I was pressing every single charge possible. By the time the sun came up, I was already on the phone with my lawyer. Karen had officially gone too far, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I gave him the full rundown, her repeated harassment, the illegal water shutoff, the false complaints, and, of course, the hilarious yet highly incriminating footage of her being annihilated by Henry. He barely stifled a laugh before saying, "Yeah, Bill, this is an open and shut case. Let's hit her with everything we've got." I was ready. I had my security footage. I had witnesses, thanks to some neighbors who had seen her sneaking onto my property more than once. And I had a paper trail of every bogus complaint she had filed. But then, in true Karen fashion, she beat me to the punch. That afternoon, I got a knock on my door. A process server stood there, looking almost apologetic as he handed me a lawsuit notice. Karen was suing me. For what, you ask? According to her laughably ridiculous complaint, she was seeking damages for emotional distress caused by an unprovoked attack by Henry, unsafe property conditions, the mud she fell in, negligence for allowing a wild animal to roam freely. I could hardly believe it. She wasn't just trying to play the victim, she was actually hoping to flip the script and make me the bad guy. I shook my head, biting back a laugh. This woman was delusional. The next morning, I strolled into my lawyer's office, handed him the lawsuit papers, and said, "You are gonna love this one." He flipped through them, raised an eyebrow, and muttered, "Is she serious?" I just nodded. He let out a chuckle, pulled out my counterclaim, and added a few extra legal punches for good measure. "Let's see how she likes being on the receiving end of a real lawsuit," he said, smirking. By the time we were done, Karen was in for the shock of her life. The day of the hearing arrived, and I had never been more ready for anything in my life. Karen thought she was walking into court as the victim, expecting sympathy and an easy payout. What she didn't know was that she had built her entire case on a foundation of nonsense, arrogance, and one very, very bad decision to mess with me. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, feeling like a man about to watch a bad magician fail a disappearing act. Karen was already there, sitting with her overpriced attorney, shooting me smug glances like she had already won. She had no idea what was coming. The judge took his seat, and Karen's lawyer stood first, launching into a ridiculous speech about how his client had suffered a traumatic and humiliating attack on my property. She was viciously ambushed, he declared dramatically, by an aggressive, unsupervised animal, one that Mr. Randall knowingly allowed to roam freely, despite its clear danger to the public. I could see Karen nodding along, as if she expected the judge to gasp in horror and immediately rule in her favor. Instead, the judge raised an eyebrow and turned to my lawyer. "Mr. Randall, do you have any response to these allegations?" "Oh, absolutely, Your Honor," my lawyer said, practically grinning. "We'd like to introduce video evidence." Karen's face drained of color. The bailiff set up the screen, and within moments, the courtroom was treated to a full cinematic masterpiece. Karen sneaking onto my property like a cartoon burglar. Karen tampering with my water valve on camera. Karen being chased, attacked, and ultimately humiliated by Henry in full glorious HD. The courtroom erupted into muffled laughter. Even the judge had to cover his mouth for a second before composing himself. Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Ms. Wilson," the judge said, rubbing his temples, "did you, or did you not, illegally trespass onto Mr. Randall's property and attempt to interfere with his utilities?" Karen stammered. I was trying to prevent excessive water usage in our community." The judge sighed heavily. "Ms. Wilson, Mr. Randall's property is not part of your HOA. You have no legal authority over his water supply, and you certainly do not have the right to trespass onto his land." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the judge wasn't having it. "In fact," he continued, "given this blatant disregard for private property laws, I find that Mr. Randall's counterclaim for harassment, property interference, and trespassing is more than justified." Karen's smug confidence shattered into pure horror. And then the hammer dropped. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me $100,000 in damages and legal fees. The color drained from Karen's face completely. She turned to her lawyer as if hoping for some kind of miracle, but all he could do was avoid eye contact and start packing up his briefcase. As the final insult, the judge looked directly at her and said, "Ms. Wilson, I strongly suggest you stay away from Mr. Randall's property from now on, unless you'd like to face criminal charges next time." Karen was speechless. I on the other hand, was enjoying every second of her downfall. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her face an angry shade of red, but this time there was no smugness, no parting words, no empty threats. She had lost everything. But the fallout didn't end there. The news of her humiliating defeat spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA board, who had once backed her out of fear or obligation, suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Nobody wanted to be associated with a president who had not only been sued and lost, but had also been publicly exposed for trespassing, harassment, and getting her ass kicked by a goose. Within a week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I didn't attend. I wasn't part of their ridiculous little club, but I heard from a few neighbors that it was an absolute bloodbath. Karen tried to defend herself, blaming me, blaming Henry, even blaming the judge, but it was useless. The residents, already fed up with her power-hungry leadership, voted her out unanimously. She was done. And it got even better. With a $100,000 debt hanging over her head from my lawsuit, Karen was left with no choice but to put her house up for sale. The same house where she had once lorded over the community, barking orders at people about mailbox colors and lawn height. Now it had a big "for sale" sign stuck in the front yard. I made sure to walk past it every single day with Henry, tipping my hat in satisfaction. The reign of Queen Karen was officially over. With Karen out of the picture, life on the ranch finally returned to normal. No more HOA threats, no more phony violations, and most importantly, no more sabotage. The neighborhood, once under Karen's iron grip, suddenly felt more relaxed. People stopped living in fear of ridiculous fines for minor infractions like leaving their trash bins out too long or using the wrong shade of beige for their fences. But the biggest winner in all of this? Henry. Word of the Goose incident spread beyond our little community. Neighbors who had barely spoken to me before were now waving as they passed by, some even stopping at my gate just to catch a glimpse of the legendary bird who took down Karen. Kids pointed excitedly whenever they saw him, and one guy jokingly asked if I rented him out for security work. Henry, of course, took all the attention in stride. He strutted around the property like he owned the place, head held high, fully aware that he was now an icon of justice and vengeance. So naturally, I had to honor his achievements. I built a small wooden sign right by the ranch entrance so that anyone who passed by would know who really ran things around here. It read, "Henry, defender of the ranch, conqueror of Karen, and the only goose to win a lawsuit." Every time I see it, I can't help but smile. As for Karen, she left town soon after selling her house. Rumor has it she tried to join another HOA in a different neighborhood. But with her reputation, let's just say the welcome wasn't warm. And me? I finally got what I wanted from the very beginning. Peace and quiet on my own land. Well, mostly quiet. Earl the rooster still wakes me up at the crack of dawn, and Henry still attacks the UPS guy. But I wouldn't change a damn thing.